Eddie, we're running about 10 minutes late. I hereby call to order the November 15th, 2018 special meeting of the Palm Springs City Council. Would everyone please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Please place your hand over your heart and repeat the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. City Clerk, would you please do a roll call?
Councilmember Middleton.
Here.
Councilmember Kors.
Here.
Councilmember Holstead.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Roberts.
Present.
Mayor Moon.
Present.
All council members are present.
Okay, thank you. This is a special meeting, and we only have one item on the agenda tonight, which is to provide direction regarding draft maps for voting district boundaries for a city council district-based electoral system pursuant to Elections Code Section 10010. Since this is somewhat of a unique situation, unique meeting, what I'm going to propose that we do this evening is that we start out and have the subcommittee report on the districting, and then that will be followed by a report from the working group. And then after that, we will go into public comments. And I've had suggestions from the rest of the council that because of the special subject here, that we will not have a time limit on the public comments, but we will ask people who are speaking to please respect the time of everyone present and keep your comments succinct. But we won't use a timer. Everyone's okay with all that?
Well, I would only add to the audience that what we have found these days when we don't put limits on speech, the audience will let you know how long if you've gone too far. And we've had some real success with that, actually.
Okay, with that, we will ask the subcommittee on the district to please make their report.
Sure. Mr. Mayor, thank you. And I want to begin by thanking everyone in the public in Palm Springs. From everything that we have heard from folks who have been through this process multiple times, no surprise to us, but with great pleasure, the communities in Palm Springs have truly gotten involved. We had more maps submitted than, to the best of my knowledge, came from any other city. And in many cities, there were not maps prepared by members of the public, but only by the professional demographer. So to everyone who submitted a map, I want to say thank you. And I know I may miss somebody who's in the audience, but I see Mr. Barrett, Mr. Friedman, Mr. Crawford, who all submitted maps. Is there anyone else in the audience who, and Mr. Doobie, excuse me, who actually submitted a map to us? Again, thank you to everyone, including to Mr. Prell, who contributed a map to us. We saw an interest throughout all of our communities. We had over 25 meetings that have taken place. We had a work group that gave over 600 hours to this process. We committed back in April that we were going to do our best to demonstrate that Palm Springs was an inclusive community and that Palm Springs was going to be a community that was going to make this process work. And I think we have made good on that promise. I can certainly say I am glad that we are getting close to the finish line. I now dream in maps. I wake up to maps. I go to sleep with maps. And as I'm reading a book, I find myself taking a map out and redrawing boundaries on maps. So it's always been said that God has a sense of humor, and she is punishing me for that A I got in 5th grade geography. So with that, what we are going to do this evening is take the 5 finalist maps and get down to 1, maybe 2 maps that we will work from. I don't think anyone who has looked at any of the maps has come away and said, oh my gracious, that is a perfect map. And I don't think at the end of this evening we will get to a perfect map. What we hope to get to is the 1-2 maps that we know that we can, over the next 2 weeks, and all we have is 2 weeks. On November 29, we must finalize with no further modifications what the last map is going to be. If we can get down to that last 1 or 2 this evening and have some fairly clear concepts of what all of us on City Council like, what concerns we have when it comes, we may like map X, but we don't like how neighborhood Y is treated in that map, or we don't like how this part of town is treated, but we do like how some other part of town is. If we can get those kinds of things clear in our minds, then over the next 2 weeks, we will have the opportunity with the city clerk and with the professional demographer. And let me point out Justin here and thank him for all of his work. Thank the city clerk for his and the city attorney, who all this has been a team effort. So with that, I would like to begin with asking the working group to come up and make their presentation. And I hate to do this, but I would like all of us, before the working group begins, to take a moment of silence in respect for Judy Camp, the wife of one of the members of the working group, Stephen Moses, who unexpectedly passed away last evening. Thank you.
Members of the City Council, my name is Tobias Wolf. I'm one of the co-chairs of the working group. It's a pleasure to be before you again. I'm going to be relatively brief, and I'm going to make some opening remarks and then turn it over to my colleague Ed Doobie. The working group, since we last came before you and spoke with you, has continued to meet on a weekly basis, and we have been participating along with Anthony in the community outreach and engagement efforts. Members of the working group have actually staffed or organized each of the community engagement events that you have listed in your staff report, and they have been fantastic events. I've only been able to attend, I think, one of them myself because of having this job on the East Coast that demands my attention sometimes, but my colleagues have been staffing every single one of these and have been spending a lot of time speaking with a broad cross-section of members of the community, seeking as much input from them as possible. It's been a very rich and exciting effort, as has been true throughout all the work that we've been doing. Part of the purpose has been instrumental in this exercise of figuring out the map drawing task, but part of it has also been for the purpose of creating those bonds of trust and creating those relationships in these communities that are, we hope, going to continue forward as Palm Springs enters a new phase of its civic political relationship. I want to call to your attention the two modified versions of 2 of the 5 finalist maps that we submitted for your consideration, a modified version of the Dieter Crawford map and a modified version of the Agave map. We made relatively minor modifications to those maps that were designed to strengthen them, both to strengthen their advancement of the goals of the CVRA and also to reflect input that we received from communities that had views about, for example, keeping neighborhoods together, the neighborhoods that were the most natural groupings that folks wanted to see reflected in the districts and so forth. And we think that those modified versions of those 2 finalist maps are improvements, and we hope that you will give them your serious attention. We think that they are the 2 strongest maps, and we spent a fair amount of time trying to balance all of the different species of input that we've been getting, and these are the 2 that we've come up with. We also wanted to ask, if you would, to take the Doobie 2 map out of consideration among the 5 that you're looking at. You're going to have to do some narrowing down of options. And Ed can speak to this a little bit more, but this was really a map that was created for the purpose of just seeing what it would look like to have districts that all run east-west for purposes of beginning to wrap our minds around the various different options. If you look at the map on a piece of paper, it's a kind of visually interesting map. we think that is the least successful of all the maps when it comes to advancing the multiple goals of the CVRA. And so we think it's an easy first one to take out of consideration. That would be our recommendation. The last thing I'll say is that we are looking forward to having the opportunity to work with you all further on the other items in the working group report that we submitted that relate to barriers to service in city government and barriers to running for office in city government. These are all, of course, a very integrated part of the exercise that we're going through. For now, all of our attention is focused on maps because that's the only thing that we can do in this very moment. But when you all are ready to turn your attention to the other items on the working group report, we are going to be ready to assist you in whatever way we can. And with that, let me turn it over to Ed Doobie, and he will say a few words about the modifications to the Dieter Crawford map and the Agave map and why we think that it makes them stronger to advance the multiple goals of the CVRA. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ed Doobie, for those of you that don't know me. Let me just reiterate, we very strongly urge that you take the Doobie 2 map out of consideration. Since that was my map, I have no difficulty asking you to do that. The dilution factor that is applied there is, we feel, very severe in terms of achieving the goals of the CVRA work group. I realize that it's very hard to see these maps. You have hard copies oh, you can zoom in. Okay, let me walk you through real quick because I know you were here until very late last night and I don't want to keep you here any longer than you need to be tonight. For the Crawford map, what we did is we reconnected neighborhoods that had been separated. So the Upper West Side has been rejoined, basically moving the southern part from District 2 to District 1. We reconnected the Gene Autry neighborhood to the east, moved that from District 1 to District 2, so those have sort of balanced out. We moved El Rancho Vista Estates based on public commentary from District 1 into District 2, which then gave us room within the total population balance, go back up, to reconnect the Whitewater Club in District 1, which is on the northeast corner. And the final thing that we did to the Crawford map was we reconnected the El Mirador neighborhood so that it is completely contained. We had to reconnect it and put it in District 2 because of the total population balance between the districts. I did try to play with it to put it in District 3. It becomes very complex, unfortunately. The other thing that we played with, but we didn't end up doing, go all the way down to Lawrence Crossley, is we did not expand the Lawrence Crossley neighborhood to the little parcel, the orange parcel that represents the whole census tract, because that threw us above the dilution factor target that we had set of no more than 2%, 3% above 50-50 split. There are some modifications that still have to be done, which would require the census, the people that actually do the census maps, because we ourselves cannot change those maps. That would be such things as around the Whitewater Park. You can see there's little pink slivers that represent north of Morona, I believe, and to the east, and the northern road in Gene Autry and the eastern road of Desert Park. That's nothing that I could change. Those will have to be done by the census group. If we switch to the Agave map real quickly, the Agave map had more changes. Here again, in the first district, we reconnected the Upper West Side. We reconnected Gene Autry. We moved the El Rancho Vista Estates. We reconnected the Whitewater Club. And then we started to deal with other problems that had been brought to our attention. We reconnected the whole Movie Colony East. Here again, that was like when we changed El Mirador in the Crawford map. We could only reconnect that and put it in District 3 because of the 10% deviation between the total populations of the districts. We moved Sunmore to east of the airport and included it in District 4. We squared up, as you can see. We've made that the districts were more compact around the airport. We reconnected Sunrise Park in this map. The southern portion, which will be the College of the Desert, was reconnected with Sunrise Park. We reconnected Gateway, the part that's south of the airport above Demuth Park, so that that neighborhood is complete and intact. We reconnected the park to Demuth Park, Demuth Park Park to Demuth Park neighborhood. What we could not do is we could not reconnect the Sunrise Park to the Sunrise Park neighborhood, only because the census tract keeps Sunrise Park connected to the high school and Gateway, which is part of the Gateway neighborhood. So that we'll have to talk to the Census Bureau to help us with that one. And finally, we brought the Agave map all the way down so it connected the Lawrence Crossley district, which we had been urged to do in almost all of our public hearings. And with that, I'll hand it back over to you guys.
Thank you. Are there any more comments from the working group this evening? Mr. Mayor, I think it would be appropriate to go to public comment.
Right now, we only have 2 speakers who have signed up, correct, Mr. Mejia? Our 2 speakers are David Friedman and Don Barrett. So David Friedman.
Good evening, Mayor Moon, Mayor Pro Tem Roberts, and council members. My name is David Friedman. I'm a member of the resident of the Indian Canyons neighborhood. First, I would like to thank council for its strong commitment to public input and carrying out the districting process. As Councilmember Middleton noted, I was one of the many who submitted maps. Following review of the 5 shortlisted maps, I prefer the Prel map for the following reasons. First, it creates specific communities of interest for all 5 districts and reflects informal neighborhood coalitions that have already developed. District 1 includes the communities along the city edge. Districts 2 and 3 contain the core hillside areas west of Palm Canyon Drive. District 4 groups some of the neighborhoods affected by airport noise, and District 5 covers the neighborhoods potentially affected by golf course conversions, including my own. Little Beverly Hills neighborhood should also be included in District 5 as it's close to Bel Air Greens. Second, each of the districts contains a commercial area that can be championed by a council member. District 1 has the shopping centers at the intersection of Gene Autry and Ramon, as well as the industrial areas in the Demuth Park and Desert Highlands Gateway Estates neighborhoods and near the freeway in the north end of the city. Districts 2, 3, and 4 have parts of the downtown and uptown business districts, and District 5 contains the Smoke Tree shopping centers and car dealerships along East Palm Canyon Drive. Third, it has few divisions of organized neighborhoods, and those are easy to resolve. That being said, I note that Mr. Crawford's map is the best of the 5 in creating majority-minority district by citizen voting age population District 1, and thus achieving one of the core goals set by council. If Mr. Crawford's map for District 1 could be combined with the best features of Mr. Prell's map for Districts 2 to 5 that I just mentioned, and then there would be strong communities of interest for each of the 5 districts. And having just seen Councilmember Middleton's map, it does look that many of those combinations are in the Middleton map, so I would also support that map. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. Our next speaker is Don Barrett, and then Bruce Hoban, and then David Hyams.
I'm Don Barrett from the Warm Sands neighborhood. As I've expressed in various portions of these roundtables about the maps, that my main concern is about commonality in housing composition, where housing composition closely reflects the socioeconomic differences and ethnic differences that that initially brought the issue up. I find that housing, if we consider mobile home parks, apartment houses, and smaller, older, less expensive homes, that districts that contain those homes are more likely to reflect the socioeconomic concerns and the ethnic concerns previously brought up. I find that the Prel map is the closest to meeting that in my concerns. I am concerned that some portions of the neighborhoods south of the Ace Hotel, the mobile home parks down there, are in with another type of housing, but it's but having worked on developing a map, I see that it's hard to fit everything into what you would like them to fit in. But the Prel map is my main preference, and then the modified DETR actually fits very well with with those similar concerns. I tend to see there being a Ramon corridor of less expensive homes, and both of those include those very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Next, Bruce Hoban, followed by David Hyams. Mr. Hyams is the last person who's requested to speak, so if anyone else would like to speak, please put a card in to the city clerk at this time.
First, thank you for everybody's hard work on this. This is amazingly complicated, and I wish I had more time to really dive in like other people have obviously done. I again express my concern about the Prel and the smoke tree maps that create more or less a big money district and the cost of running in those districts. I realize that the point of this is to make sure we create a minority-majority district, but there's several ways we can dice and slice all this data. So if we can avoid creating a place where it could cost up to $400,000 to run for office, that would be helpful. Okay. I realize that part of that problem too, though, is that Main Street and other organizations are concerned about keeping the business district together. In all kindness, business districts don't vote. It's the citizens who may own those stores who do vote, who live in other districts. And finally, I just would like a confirmation, because Lisa and I have had this conversation, okay, that what we're doing in the next couple of weeks is not set in stone forever. This is based on 2010 census data. I think we could all agree our city has changed demographically quite a bit. And so I would just ask for a confirmation that, based on when the data is available on the enumeration districts, okay, this could be subject to tweaking in 2021. This is not set in stone forever, and we're not stuck with decisions made tonight. It is flexible based upon the way the city changes. And if somebody could confirm that, I'd be really happy, just for the purposes of who's in the audience tonight and who's watching via video. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoban. David Hyams and Dieter Crawford.
Yes, good evening. And I want to thank the working group as well. I've had an opportunity to attend a few of the meetings, very impressed. I am here this evening in support of the original Dieter Crawford map. There's a couple of things that I wanted to mention. One, I really like the idea of the map coming from a citizen of our community. Two, I support what Dieter was trying to accomplish vis-a-vis historical events here in Palm Springs. And finally, what I like about the demographic data, if we use the citizen of voting age population, which I know goes back a number of years, so we'll hope that that's improved. You do have a 50-50 split in District 1, between the non-Hispanic white and the minority. So it's a majority-minority situation. The NGC Agave map does that as well, brings it to 50-50, to what I think is important, that parity. If we then look at the number of votes we're talking about, if we move that 50% to 51%, and I'm talking about the non-Hispanic white number going up, i.e. the minority going down, I estimate, based on citizen of voting age population, that each 1% could be 30 minority votes. I understand that right now in Indio, there is an election where they're talking about, somebody said today at the Measure J meeting, 5 votes difference. So each 1% that we swing from that 50-50 is conceivably 30 minority votes that are going to go into another district. So if we're really serious about that being a key premise, watch out for those percentages, because I would hate to find out on a day after election that somebody in District 1 in the minority community lost by 25 votes. And we had purposely tweaked it to take 2% away, which would be 50 or 60 votes. I'm just calling that to your attention. I would think you too would be a bit saddened or chagrined the day after that election. I know I would be, given again the premise that that's very, very important. Thank you very much, and have a happy and safe Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Mr. Hyams. Dieter Crawford.
Good evening, good evening. My name is Dieter Crawford, and as Mr. Hines said, I still like the original Dieter Crawford map because it has the largest majority minority district. That's what I was trying to create when I developed the map. I don't like the new modified ones because they take the non-white voting age population to 53%, as the gentleman just said before. I'm not opposed to moving the El Rancho Vista and the Gene Autry neighborhood out of the district, but I don't like the Palm Springs Country Club or the Whitewater Club being in there because that's, as you can see on all the modifications, that's where the 3% votes jumps when you put in the Whitewater Country Club, Palm Springs Country Club, whatever you want to call it. I would prefer Racket Club West and the area surrounding Indian and Francis, where the Sunnyview Villas are and the Parkwood and the future lower income homes that are going to be at San Rafael and Indian. I believe there's a underrepresented population there. None of those communities are in a neighborhood organization, and they're not getting any representation at all. So those are my last thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Anyone else wish to put in a card in to speak? Seeing none, we will close public comments. Council discussion? Councilmember Middleton?
I would like to, I don't know if I want to spend time walking through each one of the maps and what we were trying to do. I'm certainly willing to do that if that's what everyone here on council would appreciate. What we've not spoken, though, of is the many different public forums that we had. And in none of this were we out at the various public forums telling individuals, well, if 30 people vote for map X and 20 people vote for map Y, then that clearly means map X is the better map. What we truly tried to consistently ask people to do was to identify which map they like best and tell us why. And we really wanted to hear that why. And the Dieter Crawford map overwhelmingly at the various public forums that we attended was the most popular map. And
we said the original, the Dieter Crawford one.
Pretty much the original. And we can spend a lot of energy debating some of the modifications. Most of them have to do with trying to preserve neighborhood boundaries. As example, on the original Dieter Crawford map, the Gene Autry neighborhood is divided into two districts. That neighborhood would like for to be held together, and the portion that in the original map that was going into District 1 is disproportionately minority as compared to the portion of the Gene Autry neighborhood that is left in District 2. And that's one of the reasons why the citizens of voting age percentages went from 50% non-Hispanic white up to 52 in some of the modified versions. There were a couple of other changes, but most of what was happening in those modifications was just simply trying to hold neighborhoods together. And we can go back and forth an awful lot on a individual neighborhood. Something, though, that I think is incredibly important and we should not lose sight of is at Demuth Park, meeting with the largely Filipino community, we heard in that meeting overwhelming support for the Crawford map because of District 1 and wanting to be together with other communities of low-income individuals of color. We heard that at Coyote Run with a largely Latino population, and we heard that at Desert Highland Gateway with a largely African-American population. So for the question, do these communities at the northeast and south ends of our town want to be together in a district? They said yes, and I think that's something that's incredibly important in terms of what they said. For many individuals, we also got a lesson in some of those meetings that the legacy of Section 14 still lives, in that individuals who lived in Section 14 either went north or went east when they were removed. But that doesn't mean that they didn't still continue to connect with one another in churches, in shopping, among families, and in other kinds of connections. So to that question, is there a community of interest? I think we can very much say with District 1, the Crawford map, there is incredibly strong support for that in the communities that would be represented within that district. And so I think that's something that truly comes through. As you get into other parts of the city, there were a lot of other comments that we can go back and forth on. The neighborhoods to north of Vistacino, largely north of Vistacino and south of San Rafael, certainly I tended to identify with one another. Neighborhoods along the west side of the airport tended to identify with one another. I want to thank Mr. Barrett in particular for pointing out where all of the mobile home parks were in our community and why that could be important as a part of our maps. At the south end of town, there is clearly communities of interest around people at the south end of town, although it did very much seem that those in Andreas Hills, Indian Canyon, Canyon Corridor, Twin Palms, those neighborhoods to the west of the mountain saw themselves very differently than, for the most part, those neighborhoods east of the mountain. And because the mountain is so dramatic down there at the south end of town, connections east to west don't happen as much as they drive north, and they find themselves, as I heard from few people in Andreas Hills, I have more in common with the tennis club than I do with individuals in Araby Cove. And I'll finish with what I started with. There is no perfect map, and you think you've got all of the neighborhoods lined up in a really good way, and you find out your population balance is off by 400 and need to restart all over again.
Councilmember Coors? Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a few comments, and thank you everyone for the work and all the maps that were submitted and the comments today. I think throughout the process, the last time as we narrowed down maps, I think the subcommittee, and similar to what we've heard from the public, was drawn to the Crawford map. If you haven't gotten it, I think out front, Councilmember Middleton did a map that has a lot of similarities to that with some modifications that just folks might want to just look at. But I think one of the things I want to touch on is that I liked in the smoke tree map is just on the south side. If you look at where District 4 and 5 meet, how it sort of uses 111 as the split. So it added Melody Ranch and Tockwitz into District 4, so that was, sort of seemed like a logical split. So it's just something that I wanted us to look at as we do that, because then every district is touching on 111. And one of the things, we've been looking at, in addition to all the many issues that were raised by folks tonight, is, major roads, right? Sunrise, Vistacino, 111 as natural boundaries, as we look at the topography, which is one of the areas we're supposed to be looking at as we do this. So, having some flexibility in the south part is a little more what I'm looking at than the north part. Two comments from one of the speakers I do want to address: the idea of, in some maps, some of the wealthier areas are together, and well, I think you can make either argument, right? Split those up, but then you end up have people who can self-finance running in 3 districts, and that may not be ideal either. And so we're looking at communities of interest, and that may be a community of interest. So, I think we have to factor that in as we're looking at this, as we're looking at the housing element, as we're looking at the other factors. These maps are good until the next census, and we'll get that data sometime in 2021. And the idea is then, hopefully, if these are working, you adjust them. You don't have to start totally from scratch. You adjust them based on population. So we definitely would like to get it right now. But yes, there's flexibility to make adjustments in not that many years. So that is an important point. These maps are not going to be exactly like this in 10 years. But I think if you look at other places that have gone to districts or have been districts a long time, they tend to sort of build that community and tend to build organizations tied to it. So you don't want to make wholesale changes unless there's a real problem. You want to adjust them. But obviously the census data will be what it is. Ideally, my understanding, and I just want to confirm with our attorneys, is we're trying to avoid, in addition, we'd like to keep as many neighborhoods together as possible, and most of these do a really good job of that, is we want to avoid splitting census tracts unless we're really stuck. That's my understanding of the advice we've been given, so I want to...
Yes, that's accurate. I think the best person to explain why, if you want an explanation, is the demographer.
I think it'd be helpful for folks, because it came up in the meeting about splitting census tracts and what the issues are there.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Councilman Kurz, of course. My name is Justin Levitt, for those of you who missed the introduction earlier, with National Demographics. And I'll just talk about splitting census blocks. First of all, I want to emphasize that as the council...
Oh. I'm sorry to interrupt. I see people going like this and showing that they can't fully hear you. So if you could speak up and slow down so everyone can understand. Thank you.
I'll try to speak closer to the microphone as well. I'm just getting my notes in order for this. So I want to start by kind of reiterating the point that we have a census coming up in 2 years. And with that census, later this year, the city of Palm Springs will have an opportunity to suggest to the census where new census block divisions should be drawn. And so this problem is temporary. Literally, I don't think the census considered in 2010 how many districts and how many cities would be switching to district elections. And since the city of Palm Springs is more or less kept together in congressional district and other district maps, this has become an issue when we look at this as a local elections question. Now, that doesn't help us right now, but I think looking toward the future, a lot of these problems are very temporary, and I want to emphasize that. In terms of actually splitting census blocks, the issue is that it could present a potential legal challenge if that block, having been moved or having been split, could result in district popular deviations above that 10% threshold the court allows. And that's really the source of this challenge. If you want to pass a plan that has the most likelihood of surviving any potential court challenges, then you need to avoid a plan that splits census blocks, particularly those where there's an ambiguity in terms of keeping that deviation under 10%. And that is why our recommendation in general to every jurisdiction we work with is not to divide census blocks. And if that is, for example, the only way to create a plan that is acceptable to the council, we could look into that. But we have to literally count in that place, house by house, using 2010 housing figures, aerial photographs to the extent possible, what that percentage divide would be in terms of the population. We cannot make any assumptions about the racial composition or the demographic composition of those blocks. We simply equally or proportionally split that population between the two districts. This could also affect your Voting Rights Act issues if, for example, you're splitting a census block that partially is in District 1 in one of these maps. And so for that reasons, we generally recommend holding off until the next census when we can put these new lines in place to ensure that we have block lines that follow your neighborhood boundaries.
If I could interject, that has become particularly problematic in a couple of locations where essentially new construction took place since 2010. Up at the far north end of town, in the area where the Coyote Run and the Four Seasons neighborhood west of of Sunrise, that area there is one extremely large census block. And we have two very distinct neighborhoods within that large census block. And it's very difficult, while we can identify clearly on the map which is which, and we may even know anecdotally what the racial and ethnic compositions tend to be within those two neighborhoods. That's not what the law allows us to do in terms of how we would allocate numbers within those places. There are a couple of other examples, but that is was probably the clearest example we had of where census tract blocks created issues for us.
Mayor Pro Tem Roberts.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm sitting here with 5 maps in front of me, and it's a little bit mind-boggling. I have to, again, thank the working group and my colleagues on the subcommittee because I get blurry after a little while trying to make sense of these, but more importantly, trying to solve every problem. And every time someone steps up to the microphone and makes me aware of another balance problem, it throws me off. Councilwoman Middleton, your test map very much favors the map that I've always been drawn to, which is the Dieter Crawford map 1. One of the issues with that map that concerns me a little bit is that El Mirador gets cut in half, if I'm reading this correctly, in the Middleton Test 5. And I should also admit to you that I care because that would be my district.
Actually, we're trying to keep El Mirador together.
Are you? Because
we run into some issues in terms of being able to count, and I think I want to see El Mirador held together. I'm very confident that we can do that. I'm not necessarily confident that we have done that with this test map, but
yeah, in your test map, is it not cut up? Am I reading it correctly?
I think
the working group D Crawford modified, it looks like it's together, and then in your working group, it's divided. In Smoke Tree, it's together. But in yours, well, in Dieter's, it's chopped up also.
Justin, didn't we run into a census tract
That
issue
is exactly what's going on here, Councilmember Middleton. 90% of the population of El Mirador is in District 3. In the test map 5, there's that little tiny bit to the very west end that would require splitting a census block that's population is in the area that doesn't have a neighborhood on the west side of El Mirador. For contiguity, to show you districts that actually are one piece and not broken up into two, I've put that block into District 2 on the test map, but that would be something that we could take a look at if that was council's direction. But that's to keep it contiguous, not split off those areas south of that extension.
It's something I would want to see us do, and with a little more time, I think we could accomplish that.
You can balance it elsewhere. Overall, I think Middleton Test 5 takes the very best of Crawford, makes a few good adjustments. I think, Dieter, when you were up here, you said that you were good with the adjustments that got made in Middleton 5. Is that the one you were referring to? I'm sorry, Dieter, will you come on up so we can catch this on our recording? Sorry about that.
Yeah, the area I was referring to is the El Rancho Vista Estates and then the corner of Gene Autry there. Mm-hmm. But what really takes it from 50 to 52 or 53% on all the different maps is the Whitewater Club. As you look at all the different maps on the Middleton, the Whitewater Club as well is in District 2. Or it's in District 1 instead of District 2. If you look on the original Dieter Crawford, the section of the Whitewater Club is still in District 2.
I'm also seeing in Dieter Crawford 1, El Rancho Vista is held together. Lisa, in your Test 5 map, looks like Rancho Vista gets cut again.
In 5, El Rancho Vista ends up in District 1.
Is that all? Oh, so it is all there.
Yeah,
I'm just being confused by the
but Gene
name.
Autry is put together. Whitewater Club, and the reason that I pushed that into 1 is Whitewater, and that was at the request of Whitewater Club. I'm not incredibly vested in this, but it's their request. Whitewater Club will ultimately incorporate all of the land that includes the Serena Park neighborhood. And so if we do what Dieter is suggesting and have Whitewater Club in District 2, and there's some very good reasons for doing that, we will potentially ultimately split the Serena Park neighborhood, but that neighborhood does not exist today. So it's certainly, if we're going to make some changes, I'm very comfortable with that change.
Okay. Let me ask the subcommittee. We seem so close. So is our goal to get down to 2 maps that are similar that we can tweak, or what? I mean, can we get to 1 map tonight?
So,
because so far, I mean, Middleton 5 with a few tweaks seems to take in the very best of some other maps that I liked.
I think, so where the subcommittee started when we thought we were going to have a recommendation was initially to take sort of the Crawford map as the base and maybe some things from Smoke Tree in the south. That sort of turned into Middleton 5. And I think our recommendation, if it still is what it was earlier today, was to take the Crawford map and the Middleton 5 and have the subcommittee get input tonight from everyone, which we're getting, and from council, and bring back a map in 2 weeks that we can still tweak that night, but that we have to approve that night. So working with what we've heard, looking at the housing, other demographic information we've heard, and try and use those 2 as a base to get a map.
Okay, so I have
We're getting input on those two if people are good with that, and then the subcommittee will work. And obviously, we have to work quickly because we want to get this out with the next agenda, not just at the council meeting. And so we'll work over turkey.
So thank you, Councilman. I'm there. I think that somewhere between Crawford 1 and Middleton 5, we're really close, and I would be very comfortable sending these back to the subcommittee, narrowing them down but I feel that we need consensus on the maps that we send back. So can I take a survey, or where are we all?
Christie still wants to speak. Councilmember Holt still wants to speak, and I haven't spoken yet either.
Okay. I just wondered where everybody was at this point.
We haven't all spoken yet.
Okay.
Councilmember Holstage?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My screen is wonky again. Okay. Yeah, I prefer the Dieter Crawford map 1, the original one. I get a look at this at 3,000 feet, so I don't get to be on the weeds as much as the working group, but I think that's a valuable perspective that those of us who aren't on the working group bring. So I looked at and sort of the polling that the working group got from all of the comments, everyone that commented and gave preferences, and the informal sort of ballots that were taken. And it seemed like the winners, the top 3, were the Crawford, the Prell, and the Smoke Tree. So those are the 3 that I had picked. I have some questions for the working group. So is it the working group's recommendation that it's the Crawford modified and the Agave modified? Is that your recommendation to council, since those are the ones you presented to us tonight and are in this packet? Is that accurate? If anyone wants to answer that, or if the subcommittee can answer?
Yes, the intent of the modification was to reconnect the neighborhoods that were split, like Upper West Side. We heard those comments time and time again. That's why the modification was done. I realize that the dilution factor does get tweaked by a good 2% when we do that, but that was within the original task, our mission statement to begin with, in terms of keeping neighborhoods together. That's why we did it.
Thank you. So that's the Crawford modified, but what about the Agave? Are you recommending council consider as the final 2 Agave, or you just were presenting the changes that you had made?
Well, the Agave map, if you look at the southern tier on both the Agave and the Crawford map, it offers a very clear dichotomy between the southern boundaries, whether or not you would split the districts along Sunrise and 111, or you do it along the water, along Tockwitz Creek and Palm Canyon Wash. Those were that's the trade-off for you to debate.
Okay.
In those 2 maps.
Okay, that makes sense.
Just one very quick comment on Whitewater. The top section, which is included in Crawford 1, is going to be surrounded by senior housing, and it's got a very low-income trailer park. The section that's Whitewater is going to be single-family and higher price point housing. So the separation of those 2, when it does, if you did that, when it did come, when it's built out, it wouldn't create a problem. And in fact, they're going to be 2 different economic areas.
Thank you. And I just wanted to comment a bit in response to Councilman Cors's comments about the south end, the District 4, from Smoke Tree. Because I think that was the 3rd most popular from the community, was Smoke Tree. Trying to rip all these packets apart and find the right map, and
we're all there. We've all shredded them.
Here it is. Thank you. I lost it. I live in Sonora Sunrise. We have kind of wear different hats here, but as we're talking about communities of interest, I live in Sonora Sunrise, and I think that smoke tree more accurately depicts and includes the communities of interest there. And I heard that from my neighbors and different community members of we have to be really thoughtful about how we're grouping that south end. So I think that there's more work to be done there. And I thank you for raising that. Again, I'm just trying to build the best possible district for anyone. It's not about me. That's why I had pulled the Doobie 2, and I wanted to talk about having east to west districts. I do agree, and I had just included that for a public conversation about a different type of model, different type of map that we are including, because I wanted to hear back from the public and kind of put that against the wall and see what came back. But I do strongly believe that we should not pick the Doobie 2 map because it doesn't meet our priorities. And so I would support picking the Crawford 1, the original. The the Middleton Test 5, this is the first time I'm seeing it right now. So I don't feel comfortable picking it as one of the top 2. I think it should be included, but I think that for the public, we still need to wrap their heads around it and see it. And I know we don't have a certain number that we have to pick tonight. We just have to whittle them down to be able to pick one. So maybe that's okay for us that we're picking. We heard from the community quite clearly that the Crawford original is the top one for lots and lots of people. And then we also include the Middleton. I think that I would be okay with that. But if I've just seeing this now and trying to comprehend it, I think that the community would want more time to do that as well, including this map, if that makes sense. So I think that's a good recommendation. I think we'll probably all agree. But I'd like to hear from the mayor as well.
Right. I really hate these yellow folders because we've been, looking at these, the original package for several days, and then we come in and have these new ones, and the new ones have some really great factors, but there hasn't really been time to go through and highlight you can look at the map, but until you can sit and analyze the figures and the charts, it's a little bit more difficult. However, I think any of them would work well, because when we talk about 1 or 2 percentages on a certain demographic, and there are so many demographics, involved here and the data is so old that I don't think 1 or 2 percentages is really that accurate of a difference, because of those factors. And I also think that this map is going to be used probably in one election. Because by the time the next election comes along, we're going to have we're going to have some very fresh data and very fresh from the census and also from the results of the next election. So we're going to, the council will be sitting here at that time will be able to really tweak this really well. I think our responsibility here is to find the best one we think that will work. And I think any of these 3 will. I'm looking at either Crawford 1, which was my first choice before we got these additional ones. But without doing some analysis, the Crawford modified, I like the idea because they did away with some of the split neighborhoods of it, but I don't know how much difference that makes on the demographics that are important. And the Middleton test case, I would tend to look at seriously because Lisa's been involved in this up to her neck since the very beginning, so she probably has got a lot of good factors in here that I haven't had a chance to analyze yet. So I think Dieter 1 or or Crawford 1 or Crawford modified or the Middleton test map would all be good choices.
If I could just, on the test map that I did, and it was finished this week, and it's number 5 because it was the 5th version that was worth actually sending to the demographer and asking them to test it. The other 444 versions that I never sent to the demographer are somewhere in this stack. But what I was trying to accomplish with those is connecting all of the neighborhoods that we could possibly connect. To the best of my knowledge, only the Upper West Side neighborhood is split on this map, and that's split where they were acceptable with that split along San Rafael Drive. And it is based on the Crawford map, and the smoke tree maps. Crawford map to the northern end of town and the smoke tree map to the southern end of town.
Councilmember Coors?
Thank you, Mayor. I think the other thing that Councilmember Middleton was working on, and that I think whatever we do, if assuming there's consensus on this piece, is to keep as many neighborhoods together without splitting census tracts. And that creates challenges. But I think given the advice we've given, that's something we're trying to do in this process. So it does pose some challenges to do exactly what we want. I don't want to put too much stock, and I appreciate, you know, there could be a whole lot of projects that are approved up north that will not be built before the next time we do this. And if we based it on some projects that are now 10 years old and we're still waiting on, it could be, you know, I don't want to base things on what might happen. And, you know, if we have a recession, none of those are getting built. So I just think, I don't want to look too far ahead when this is going to get redone after the census in 2 years. But I think there are important points to note because it's one of the things we looked at and there are good points, but I want to make sure we don't put too much there because we just don't know what's happening and what will get developed and where. So, I mean, it seems like everyone is pretty much on board looking at sort of the Crawford map as a base, and we have some modifications, but we can put those together with Crawford 1 and Crawford modified, and then looking at the Middleton 5, which people have time with. The question I have, and it's probably a legal question, and we have lawyers here, and Jim Priest, who's our outside counsel, who's a specialist in this, is here. So the public will get some more time with these maps. There's not a lot, right, because of the way the time frame works on this. Council will have some more time with these maps. We can't talk to the rest of council before the next meeting, but is there a way for people, and I don't really need to know who, can get us comments so we know what they are? So we can take those things into consideration with what we bring through, or does that can only happen tonight? What's the best mechanism to try and get that information?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. If people want to submit comments one way to the council through email, et cetera, that's perfectly fine. They can just provide that information to the council, and if you would, please consider that. It becomes the dialogue that becomes an issue under Brown Act and things like that. The subcommittee can also meet with individuals and discuss proposals with them as well.
So everything should probably go to the city clerk, who can forward it to the subcommittee? Right.
Yeah.
Well, actually, if it goes to the city clerk, couldn't he forward it to more than 2 people?
Well, yeah,
the
whole council.
He can give it to all of us.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
We just can't comment back,
No,
so
we
that's
can't
the only
comment
thing I
back, but
want
he can give it to all
which
of
we
us.
all know, but I just want the public
It's
to
the
know.
dialogue that gets you in
Right.
trouble under the Brown Act. A
Yes.
one-way briefing or a one-way communication is perfectly fine.
Okay.
Would the other 3 members of City Council who are not a part of the subcommittee be able to send a one-way communication? I would like to see this on the map or that on the map. Is that permissible?
That gets a lot trickier because now
And
we're
I'm
starting to
assuming-
move on to dialogue there. Yeah.
So, no.
Yeah, I would say no.
Okay.
Yes, you're on. Lights on. Oh.
So then, right, because that's sort of the argument for only picking those 2, Dieter Crawford 1 and Middleton Test 5, because when do we make those changes? How can I, as a council member who's not on the subcommittee, go away and look and see and make changes to the map before the next meeting? And the next meeting is a public hearing, correct? When we decide the map. So then there's also restrictions for me on a public hearing item, right? That we're sitting in a quasi-judicial role deciding. I'm kind of concerned and trying to figure out what we should do right now and getting in the nitty gritty of the lines and the neighborhoods and the census tract, which doesn't seem appropriate and to delve into here, but how can I give that feedback and really review that in depth since I'm not part of the subcommittee?
What could happen is, I mean, we could perhaps route ideas through staff and have staff do a one-way communication out to the council. But again, there would not be this dialogue and ongoing communication between council members. There may be a way we can structure that possibly. Mr. Mejia, do you think there's a way we could do that?
I was just curious. So I work closely with the subcommittee. If they end up having a merging of the maps and then they have a new map to be proposed, could I then meet with the individual council members to go in depth at looking those issues and then get their feedback and
I'm going to interject.
Yes.
The short answer is no. You can't have a wagon wheel as a conversation, and you can't be the hub of that wheel. I'm sorry.
So, and then I have another question. So, are there noticing requirements? It sounds like the subcommittee is going to go back and make some changes, look at the specific boundaries with the neighborhood. So I want to make sure that we give if we make changes to that, we're posting it and giving people enough time to really review it instead of, you know, coming before and having a new map to decide that night. So do we have to, I assume we have to post that and be really clear about the changes that we're going to make well within a few days?
Yeah, after a public hearing, if there are changes to the maps, it does need to be posted at least 7 days before the next public hearing. So yeah, there are requirements that we have to post that so the public has adequate notice of what changes were made to the maps.
And then remind me what the December 10th or the additional meeting that we're adding, what's that, the purpose of that meeting?
so you on November 29th, council will have one more shot at making final modifications. Then the demographer will give me that final map. We'll post that. And then on December 10th, city council will introduce the ordinance and officially adopt the map.
So I need to bring any changes to the meeting on the 29th. And we'll just get in the weeds then, I guess, is our only option.
And Councilmember Holstage, it is imperative that we introduce that map and introduce the ordinance, I should say, at that special meeting in December, because we must adopt the ordinance, have second reading at a regular meeting, which is scheduled for December 19th.
So, subcommittee before November 22nd, before Thanksgiving, needs to publish or post the map that will be under consideration for November 29, and then on November 29, modifications can take place from that map by the balance of City Council. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, I think my questions just got answered. I do want to say that I've spent a lot of time here now examining the new Middleton 5, and it's extremely close, I think, with the exception of 2 changes to the Dieter 1 map. So those maps are almost identical. Anyway, I'm prepared to send these back to subcommittee to tweak some more.
Thank you. I agree. I would just ask the public, especially the people whose maps these are and who have been really working hard on a lot of these issues, please give us comments when you can. It doesn't have to be at the public comment portion of the meeting, we'll just forward them to the city clerk, and they'll be added to our agenda and the public materials. But we really do want to hear from you. We want to get your feedback. These are this is the time to do it. We only have about a week or two, so please, happy to get that feedback and let us know all of your comments and how they apply to these maps. That would be really helpful now that we've looked at a lot of different maps and gotten a lot of comments. Just if you have specific ones, please let us know, because we want to hear from you. Thank you. Do you have a comment, Grace? Sure.
I didn't have one earlier, but now that everyone has been talking, I have one. So one of my concerns is I know we want to keep community groups together, but as I'm looking at these maps, we have to remember that there are a lot of communities who are not involved in the community groups. Some of them are specifically left out. I know that, for instance, in the El Mirador area, there's a bunch of apartments there. I don't know if El Mirador has reached out to them or not, but they're not included in that area. We also have that in some of the trailer parks in the north. And then we also have communities like Demuth Park and Tahquitz River Estates, where we know that residents in those neighborhoods have tried to get involved with those community groups in different ways and have had a lot of resistance and have had bad experiences. So I think that we do need to keep in mind that community groups are important, neighborhood groups are important, but we also have to be here for the community as a whole and recognize that there are a diversity of interests, and there are some people who are being left out of the conversations if we only focus our time on neighborhood organizations.
Thank you. That's a really important point. I meant to make it as well. So thank you. Our different goals conflict in different ways, and we have to be really intentional about that. A lot of these neighborhood boundaries were set a long time ago. There might be other barriers to people participating. I personally have never attended my 1PS neighborhood meeting. They're frequently during working hours, or there are other barriers for some people to participate. So we just have to be really, really careful. 1PS, we want to make sure every neighborhood that can be together, but we don't, we want to make sure to be intentional about if that's taking away from some of our other interests and values like diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thank you. That's a really important point, and I want us all to be thinking about that. And that's kind of the comments I want to know is how these maps compare on those values, and if you have recommendations about that. Thank you.
Any other council members' comments? Are we ready to adjourn?
Okay. Mr. Mayor, if I could just confirm what's moving forward is Dieter Crawford Original and Middleton 5? Okay.
Yes. Dr. Reddy or Mr. Cochran, do you have any comments? Any other staff? Ready to go? Okay, seeing no other comments, the City Council will adjourn to the next regular meeting Wednesday, November 28, 2018 at 6 o'clock p.m. City Council Chamber, City Hall, preceded by closed session, small conference room. Happy Thanksgiving, and we are adjourned.